I think it's the second half. It's a great book. It's written by a Christian author who was just a layman, and but he owned a bunch of TV stations in Texas. His name is well known. You'd know the name if I told you. And but somebody came along and gave him an offer he couldn't refuse. And so he said, what am I going to do now? And so the book is about his catharsis of how he worked out his second half. And the bottom line is, you will do in the second half what you did in the first half, except you'll do it for the benefit of mankind.
Yeah. Well, my wife and I have something we do that's associated with our church. It's called Random Act of Kindness.
Mm-hmm.
And we might go into a restaurant and this lady's serving us, and you can tell she's disturbed, and she'll start talking about recent divorce and whatever and whatever. My wife and I will give her $100 bill just out of the blue. Mm-hmm. And it makes you feel good. Mm-hmm. It helps somebody. It makes you feel good. When we downsized Mickey, we didn't have one single yard sale. We gave it to people. Mm-hmm. We gave it to people in our church. We gave a lot of smaller stuff to Goodwill. Myra, that works in a front desk in the chamber, I gave her our dining room suit. Mm-hmm. That's probably worth $5,000, $6,000. Just gave it to her. Pam and I's master bedroom, our furniture we've had since we were married, just gave it to her. It made me feel good. Mm-hmm. So anyway, all right. So
is this? Are you okay with me sitting here like
I'm
this?
fine. Yeah.
So Mickey's talk about your life. Where you born, your parents, and a little bit about the major steps in your life. And you obviously went to college. A little bit of that, and certainly when you get to the Lockheed story, you can go ahead and skip to after if you want to. Then we'll just come back and tell the Lockheed story.
Okay. Well, I grew up in my first 10 years in around Memphis, Tennessee, and in areas close by. Obviously, I was born in December of 1940, so the war was not yet on. My dad did not work directly or did not go into the service, but he worked for the Air Force. And he was in the tire and rubber business for Goodyear and Firestone, and so they sent him to Gadsden to work on rubber bladders, and as it turned out, composites for military airplanes, which were presaged what I did in the future. And so I think I got some of his genes. He was also a good salesman. So to make extra money for the family, he sold shoes in the black and white store in Memphis, Tennessee. At the end of the war, Dad went into his own business. It didn't, as to the best of my knowledge, it didn't make it in plastic business. He loved chemistry. And so we moved back to my hometown in Jasper, Alabama, which is about 50 miles northwest of Birmingham. And it's a coal mining area. It's a real poor area. And I mean, I lived on a dirt road way out, and with very few facilities and everything else. So, but I loved it. It was a great childhood. My mom and dad were probably as good a people as you'll ever find. We went to the local Baptist church in a little place called Townley, Alabama. Had 65 in the total Sunday school. So this was a real rural church. But it was a great growing up. I mean, I had some of the finest Sunday school teachers you can imagine that taught me the Bible, and my mother and daddy, of course, taught me to say yes sir, no sir, thank you, and all the graces. And were just terrific. Some of my best memories of my dad is reading Bible stories to me at night and saying prayers with my brother and I before we go to bed. So I had a great role model from my parents. When we moved to Jasper when I was 10 years old, I enrolled in Townley junior high school and school. It was a very rural school. It didn't even have good water to drink in the school, and outdoor bathrooms, and you made the fires in the rooms. So I mean, it's sort of primitive. But I was a good student, but believe it or not, today I weigh nearly 240 pounds. When I was in the 9th grade, I weighed 100 pounds and had legs about this big. So I was real small. I was the runt in the class. Plus I started when I was 5 years old. So it was, I was the guy that got picked last in all of on the ball teams. And so as I sort of suffered through that, I sort of made up my mind that you're going to succeed. And you may not get it playing baseball, but some other way, you're going to succeed.
Funny story. I'll interrupt you for a second. I grew up in Nashville, Georgia. Very similar story. I didn't know I was poor.
Oh, no.
I had great parents too. Life was good, and we always had food on the table. I didn't know until years later that there were 5 kids in our family, and my dad worked at the post office. My mom stayed home. I didn't recognize just how poor I was till later on.
Yeah. But my dad worked in the chemistry department at Alabama Power in the water treatment plant. And my mother was a telephone mail order clerk for Sears in their mail order catalog in Jasper. And so I ended up going to Walker County High School in Jasper. I knew I was going to college because my dad, from the very beginning, because he actually played football the first 2 years of college. Then the war came and he couldn't finish his degree. But he had always said, you're going to the University of Alabama. That's it. No if, and, or buts. And I believed it and didn't question it. And so I took a college track. And I think I may have made 1B during my entire time at Walker County High School. So it was a great time. But unfortunately, although I was grounded good in math and English, I was not grounded as well in the sciences because the teacher was not very good. So I graduated, I think about second in the class of my high school, then went on to the University of Alabama and started taking engineering. I enrolled in aeronautical engineering, primarily because we were sitting around at the junior-senior prom and listening to White Sport Coat and Peak Carnation from Marty Robbins, and somebody said, what are you going to do in college? And I said, well, I'm good at math, so I think I'll take engineering. And they said, well, you want to be an electrical engineer? And I said, no, man, I don't understand electricity. And Sputnik had just been put in the air by the Russians. And so somebody said, well, aeronautical engineers make a lot of money. And I said, that's for me. So I became an aeronautical engineer, and it was just about that easy. So when I got to Alabama, I enrolled in aeronautical engineering, and my mom and dad had a hard time, coming up with the money, and I had a small scholarship, but it was not easy for them, so there was no idea that I was going to mess up and fail and get out because of their sacrifice. But unfortunately, midway through the first semester, I had to start taking chemistry, and I didn't have chemistry in high school. So I was sinking and going down for the 3rd time, and if it hadn't been for a friend who was a veteran that took pity on me and helped tutor me for free and got me through, and I made a C. And the next semester I made a B in chemistry, so I came out okay. And I was on the dean's list 3 of my 4 years. So I ended up second in the engineering class as well when I graduated with a BS in aeronautical engineering. Loved aeronautical engineering. Thought sure I was going to go into structures part of engineering, building structures, wings, fuselages, and so on. Got to Langley, Virginia, which was my first job, working for the NASA in their wind tunnels. And so I said, well, this is not what I bargained for. I wanted to do structures. And then they said, oh, by the way, you're going to have to work at night too. Well, I hadn't bargained for that. And they said, you're going to work for the boss. And it turns out the boss was an albino, honorary doctorate degree genius. And he never married, never owned his own house, but won the most prestigious engineering awards you can get, and invented how we fly faster than the speed of sound. So basically, the Lord directed my path and put me in a guide that I thought was terrible, and as most things that happened in my life, the things that I thought that were going to be the absolute worst possible things always turned out to be the best possible things that ever happened to me. So when I went to work for Dr. Richard Whitcomb was his name, it was, Billy and I had hardly nothing, because by that time I had married Billy, my junior high school sweetheart. So we were sweethearts in the 8th grade. And then in 9th grade, we didn't have much to do with each other. And so we went our separate ways until I saw her again, middle of my sophomore year, and was smitten all over again. Thought she was the prettiest thing I'd ever laid eyes on. And within about another year and a half, we were married. And so we were married during my last year of school. And her specialty is in children's library science. So we moved to Hampton, Virginia, with just about what was in our car. And I had visions of the money that I was making was going to just set us up. And it was $6,345 a year. I'll never forget it. And of course, I was only paying, like $35 a month to the school for a married apartment that included light, gas, and water and furnished. So I thought that was going to, continue on. Well, it didn't. And so I carried my old 54 Chevrolet, Billy, and a few belongings, and we got in this dump, was about what it amounted to. And started out life in Hampton, Virginia, working for Dr. Whitcomb. Great time, met great friends, joined a couple of Baptist churches during our time after we bought a home, and just had the best time. Well, after 7 years, it was obvious that there was not much place to go at NASA, because most of NASA, where government was giving them money, moved from Langley to Houston to start the space program. So I started looking for a place that was closer to home. By that time we had 2 children, Kay and Kelly, 2 girls, and I wanted them to grow up close to their grandparents. So I began to look around, and actually, Billy and I began to pray about the Lord sending us somewhere that would be, He would want us to be. And so I came to Marietta to a conference, and I had prepared a resume, not knowing that I was going to give it to anybody in Marietta, but I just had it in my briefcase because I was beginning to start to look. And in one of the conference, I passed a guy that I knew in the hall that was a manager, and he said, "When are you going to come to work for me?" And I said, "Well, I'll give you my resume right now." And so I did, and I went to work for a great guy. His name was Ted Dansby, a long-time Mariettan. His grandson is Dansby Swanson, that now plays for the Braves, and went to work for another great Lockheedian, Dallas Ryle, and he was my division chief. So, but unfortunately, 2 years later, the bottom fell out of Lockheed, and Lockheed nearly went bankrupt in the early 70s, and I didn't know whether I was going to have a chance to stick. And we went something for nearly 30,000 people down to about 8,000, somewhere around that. And but I did stick, and it was pretty grim out at Lockheed because the engineers had to sweep their own rooms, empty their own waste baskets. I mean, it was everybody just tried to make it do.
Mickey, just by way of background, what exactly caused that downturn in the 50s? Is that right?
No, this was in the early 70s.
The early 70s, okay.
The downturn was caused by Rolls-Royce going bankrupt. And basically, we were developing the L-1011 as a commercial passenger plane. And that was our first entry back into the commercial market. And in the commercial market, the company has to put up all their own money. There's no government money there to subsidize you as you go along. And when Rolls-Royce couldn't deliver their engines, we had airplanes finished with big cement blocks hanging on the wing, no engines. And as a result, we couldn't get any cash for the airplanes we'd built. Plus, it allowed McDonnell Douglas to come into the competition with the DC-10. And we split a market that was only probably big enough for one. So we had to climb back. We had also lost the C-5 contract. The government canceled the contract, and there were 2 or 3 others. They canceled the helicopter program, they canceled a shipbuilding program, and there may have been more. But all that piled in at one time, and we were lucky to get the congressional bailout, by which the government never lost a penny on that. I forgot the number now, but they made double-digit millions fee that when we paid back all our loans and paid them for guaranteeing the loans. So as we began to, I was approaching 40 years old, and I had developed I had started a small research group of about 10 people, and hired some great people to start developing some fascinating technology for airplanes and aeronautics. And a lot of them have gone on to bigger and greater things. Andy Thomas went on to be an astronaut in the space station, Russian space station. Others earned their doctorate degree and went on to various executive positions in Lockheed. So I was very proud of that group, but an opportunity came along that I'd really always wanted to manage people. And I had started at Georgia Tech. I got my master's at Virginia in aeronautics when I was at NASA, but I wanted to go ahead and get my doctorate when I came to Lockheed and enrolled at Georgia Tech, and then started back to school during the downturn at Lockheed and had 2 courses under my belt. And then all of a sudden, a guy by the name of Bill Lassiter, who's also a well-known person in Cobb County, said, "Mickey, I'd like you just to take over a group engineer's job temporarily for about 4 months while the group engineer is off doing something else." Because I had told him, I said, "Look, if you ever have a management job, I love what I'm doing, but if you have a management job, I would love to do it. So just keep me in mind." And that's exactly what happened. And I have found throughout my experience that if you tell people in a nice and non-threatening way that you want to progress and you want to do things, then more than likely they'll remember you and that you got a good chance of doing it. So I worked for about 4 months and was happy as a clam. I mean, I loved it. I love working with people, and I said then that if I'd rather manage people than go ahead and get my doctorate degree in engineering. So right after that, the same gentleman, Bill Lassiter, who was 3 levels above me, decided that he would like to offer me a job to manage all the research in what was known then as the Flight Sciences Division. And that's what I did. All my friends said, "Mickey, don't take this job because it's an administrative job and it's a dead end." Well, 2 years later, when I gave the job up, everybody wanted the job, and because the job is what you make it. But I was another one of those things that you said, this is going to be a disaster, is we had a vice president of engineering named Joe Cornish, and Joe was Mensa. He was just to the right of Attila the Hun. But he was an incredible character, and he did things and thought of things in engineering before other people had even conceived them. So he was given the challenge of looking at the space shuttle. Before the first space shuttle was launched, the government asked all the chief engineers around the country to look at everything that they possibly could to anticipate any problem before they launched the first space shuttle.
Can you tell me what time frame that was? I know it's a little bit of a shift, but what was that?
That was in the early 1980s. That was in the early 1980s. And so I did all the research. I reviewed the documents that they had given Joe to peruse, and I wrote him papers of what would be things to bring up and to question, and he loved it. And so the rumor then went around that he wanted me to come work for him full time. Well, Joe had not treated people that had worked for him full time very nicely in the past, and so I said, "Oh no, this is the end," because he usually fired them and laid them off. But nonetheless, through a series of happenstances, I ended up working for Joe almost full time. Well, full time really. And but it was the best thing ever happened to me. I mean, it's just incredible because he took me under his wing, and he promoted me about 3 times. And remember, I was already 40 before I had my official management job, and so I went right up to be chief engineer of special projects, and we had a lot of opportunities to sell stealth and sell other things, which were all classified, and we did. And we had about a $30 million backlog, and we were doing extremely well. And the government, our company, chairman at the time said, "No, we got too many companies in Lockheed. We need to bring them together." And so Joe said, "Mickey, I want you to amalgamate all the companies and do all the hard work in putting together what it ought to look like." which is very frustrating because as in most big companies, you have huge politics from one location to the other. And so they decided to form a research company, which was going to be in Rock Canyon, California. And my boss, Joe Cornish, was going to go out as Vice President of Engineering, and I would be promoted to Director of Research, and we would be working for Ben Rich, the very famous head of the Skunk Works. So that's what Billy and I did. We packed up and moved our kids and everybody to California, became Californians. And then we found out that the company really wouldn't work because it had no contracts. So it turned out to be just an administrative company. And it was fine. I learned a lot and had a lot of opportunities to meet a lot of people. And by that time, Ken Canestra had taken over in Georgia. And Ken had a great track record for new business and for new things. And his mission in Lockheed, Georgia was to come expand the old transport company into new areas, take on new products. And so Bill Astor, my old boss that gave me my first chance, went over to take over the advanced programs. And he called me and said, I want you to come back to Marietta and run engineering. And so, that was like throwing Burr Rabbit in the briar patch. I mean, this was terrific. So Billy and I ended up back in Marietta. And as a result, we did some great things in engineering. We began to do the high technology test bed, which was very popular flying around. Of course, it crashed on Dobbins. You may or may not remember. But
what year was that crash?
I'd have to look it up. But it was called, I think it was called the Blackbird sometimes, but that's the true Blackbird's the SR-71. But we had just a great time because we started getting new business, we started developing new products, and that's where the embryo of what became the C-130J came from, was on the high technology test bed called the HTTB. And we also did the very classified work on the trying to save the hostages in Iran, which was a very short takeoff and landing with rockets. I mean, so there was a lot of pioneering technology done during that time. And so when I thought everything was just going great, we changed chairman at the corporation and changed the aeronautics president, and he had a different way that he wanted things to go. He still felt like that we still had too many aircraft companies and wanted to start all over again, merging together. So I ended up back on that post again, trying to help amalgamate the companies. And they moved me to California again for the second time. And this was the time that the F-22 was beginning to be born. And the F-22 was really an afterthought for Lockheed, because the airplane that Lockheed really wanted was the A-12. And because it was, if you think about it, the A-12 was a lot like the F-117. It's a subsonic airplane, highly stealthy. And there was a lot of new technology that had to be developed for the F-22, which I'll talk about later. But we again went through a lot of exercises about how we were going to amalgamate the company. And this time, the chairman, Kitchens, and our president, Brizendine, decided that they were just going to amalgamate all the companies in one big pile. And it now becomes one company, no longer will be the individual companies. And so I became vice president of engineering and general manager for essentially half of what used to be the four companies. And so all the research engineering, advanced development, electronics, stealth, all of that was in my portfolio. And then another gentleman had the portfolio of project engineering and programs. So we rocked along like that for about 2 years. And they decided to bring Ken Canestra, who was the president in Lockheed, Georgia, and had done an excellent job, to California to be head of this now expanded four company that had now been amalgamated into one. And so it didn't take, and by that time, Dan Tellep, who was probably the best manager I have ever worked for, bar none, in terms of being a COO and CEO at one time and could do both jobs. Brilliant. They called me and said, Mickey, we want you to go over to the F-22. It was another disaster time. I said, this ain't gonna, oh, this is bad.
What year was that?
This was like,
Roughly.
let's see, I'm trying to think now. Probably around 86, 87, that time frame. Because they were losing. I mean, they were losing big time. And they were losing on the P7, or they had won the P7, but it was a mess because the Navy kept changing the specs on them, which eventually Dan Tellep said, you can take your airplane back. We're not going to work on it. And it was canceled. But the F-22, we were just, it was just not working. And so Ken comes over and says, look, I want you to go over and take over the F-22, the Lockheed portion of the F-22, and work for a guy named Sherm Mullen. And Sherm, of course, was another guy ahead of his time, great manager. And I said, well, I don't even know if Sherm wants me. He's very loyal to his managers, and he might even want me to work for him. Because I was sort of, giving it this, backing up, and because I was very happy in engineering. And he said, Mickey, let me explain it to you. You're either going to take this job, or the only other job you're ever going to have is you're going to go over to corporate and be a corporate puke the rest of your life. So I said, well, since you've explained it that way, I'll go talk to Sherm. And of course, I got over, and there was just lots of opportunity. They were not computerized. It was just, I had to make a lot of personnel changes, and it was an extremely hard time. And I'll come back and change that, talk about the F-22 more at the end, okay?
Okay.
So you want me to skip to where?
Let's, while you were doing this in Marietta, Lockheed was not insulated from the community. Mm-hmm. And you might talk just a little bit about tying some of the community into where Lockheed was. I know you're focused on making the business successful. Mm-hmm. There was a period of time, as I remember, y'all had some labor relations issues kind of going on. I don't know if it's a downturn or what, but we've heard that from several people. I don't know if you can shed some light on that or not. That may have been after you.
No, that was before. That was labor relations. That was all took place before me.
Okay.
One of the things we heard was the idea that when Lockheed sneezes, Cobb County gets the flu.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk more about the role in the community and what it meant?
Well, I think that was just when Lockheed sneezed and Cobb County got the flu. I think probably more, in my opinion, that's more because of the economic impact on the county. It's not so much that
Things you did in the community.
Things we did in the community or controversy in the community or anything like that, because I think Lockheed, as far as I know in my background, has always been a good community partner. Members of the Kiwanis Club, we participated in things that the community needed. But by its very nature, none of our customers were in the city of Marietta, or in the state for that matter. We would argue about the electric bill, but that was about it. And we actually had a manager that did the arguing for us with the state government. But it was a piddle because 99% of our total focus had to be on the federal government because that's where our money came from. And but nonetheless, I think Lockheed tried to be a good partner with the county and the city and the state. It was much later in my career, after I came back and became president of Lockheed, that we became more involved with the Cobb County community.
What year was that when you came back?
Let's see, I came back in around 91, 92. And at that time, I brought back the F-22 from California. It's really brought the airplane here, because Dan Tellep, our brilliant CEO, had looked around at the best place to build it. And bar none, Georgia was the best place to build it, even though it had some facility inadequacies, and which we had to go fix. But if you look at the Lockheed California facilities, they date back pre-World War II. and some of them were in old manufacturing plants for some other kind of product. I mean, they were just really old, dilapidated buildings. And so he made the hard decision, is where they'd moved all the engineers to California, and now we're going to move them all back to Marietta, and we're going to do all the manufacturing in the F-22 in Marietta. And of course, we built a brand new building for the F-22 for its engineering. It was highly state-of-the-art, which now it belongs to Georgia Tech.
Yeah, I've toured it twice, and I was part of a group that was trying to find a buyer for it, and that was like Fort Knox. I bet you built this, but the main conference room had thick walls, and it was almost like a vault. Yeah, fascinating.
Well, they have a name for them. They call them skiffs, so that nothing can get in and nothing can get out, and particularly electronics. But but I enjoyed, of course, the community, and did not have a lot of labor relations problems during the time I was there. And one reason, my daddy taught me that if you treated people right, that they would treat you right. And I fully believe that, and I don't care if you're a union or non-union. If you treat people right, they'll play with you. So when I came back and I brought the F-22 to Marietta, I found that one of the real problems is that we had become a C-130 company, and as a result, our overhead rates had. Excuse me while
Sure,
I'm gonna get a glass of water for you, man.
We're about to yank our.
I forgot.
That's right.
Sorry. Or maybe, when I started to say, maybe you'd rather go get it.
Would you mind letting me have a glass of water also? Not that I'm talking that much. This is great, though. Great story.
It'll have to be just tap water. Good. But when we came back to California, from California to Marietta to bring the F-22, I found that our overhead rates were really high, and it was killing me in terms of my budget to the Air Force. And the Air Force was turning a dim view, and that didn't matter that we had already negotiated the rates with the Air Force. The fact is we were overrunning our budget, and that didn't go down well. So I went over to Ken Canestra and I said, "You've got to fix your company. Your overhead rates are too high, and you need to work on them." And it was about 20-minute drive back to the south side of the field with the new F-22 building. And I walked into my office and looked at my email, and there was this email from Ken Canestra to everyone on his executive staff that Mickey has now been appointed as a czar of cutting costs in addition to his F-22 role. So we took it on with a vengeance. Now you would say ordinarily, well, the union might not like that if you cut a lot of costs. But what I found universally is that they want their job, they like their job, they want to be treated right, they want to have a good place to work, and believe that their contribution counts for something. And so we started a whole series of things, all of which they loved. And everybody said they're going to strike on you, they're going to do terrible things. And one of the first ones I noticed that we got, we lost an hour of productivity, everybody outside the door smoking, and that was back when you could smoke outside the door, but you couldn't smoke inside. And so I consulted my lawyers, and they said, "Yeah, you can do this. You can require that they can only smoke 3 times a day, at lunch and at the 2 breaks, and that's it." And this is our union people. And so we built fan rooms inside the big hangar, the big manufacturing facility that you go in and your hair stand on in, but it sucked all the smoke out. And we also decreed that you couldn't come to work for Lockheed as a new hire if you smoked, because we couldn't afford the insurance rates were going up like mad. We allowed all the families to go to the new family health center on base at Lockheed that Ken Canestra had put in. So during the day when everybody else was working, the families could come in and use it to reduce health costs. We revamped all the food costs, all the cafeterias, remodeled them, saved money after money, collected our warehouses together. I never will forget one of my managers that handle facilities, I taught them all what cash was worth, that this is what cash means to a company. And at the end, he got up and said, I never realized that my warehouse full of toilet tissue was cash. And so our overhead rate began to drop like a stone. And because we got rid of facilities where we had nothing in them but just old stuff, collected them together. So the hourly people loved it, that it was now becoming a good place to work. And the biggest thing we did was put in something called lean manufacturing. It's called lean. It's really after a topic called lean thinking. It's probably one of the best things I did while I was at Lockheed.
Well, that's if you study the just-in-time total quality, that lean was in the industry. I was an industrial engineer, and in the industry was a benchmark as to how to do it. Mm-hmm. So that was yours?
I brought it in. Ken Canester before me started TQM. But in TQM, and that was the best we knew how to do at the time, you take what other people do and benchmark, and you try to be as good as their benchmark. But the problem is it's not an integrated process, and that benchmark may not be good enough. And so with lean thinking, which was really pioneered, as far as I know, at least in the aerospace, through Pratt & Whitney, and it was ported from Otis Elevator by the chairman of the United Technologies. When the Japanese came over and told the chairman of United Technologies that if he didn't guarantee 100% performance from his elevators, they were not going to buy Otis elevators anymore. And he said, wait a minute, I'll give you 9 nines of quality. And they said, you don't understand. None. No failures. He said, well, how do you do it? And he said, well, we'll send over a guy to help you, but you got to promise that you got to do what he tells you to do. And sure enough, they revolutionized Pratt & Whitney. About that time, the government came to Lockheed and said, and that's the time I was president here, and they said Clinton had become president of the United States, and he cut procurement by about 80% for the armed services.
What was that time frame when that budget? He didn't do it first year he was in office, did he?
It was close. It was close to his first year in office, and but when he did that, there was not enough money for the F-22, and so the Air Force said, "You don't have a choice." We had just it was like the early '90s, like '92, '93 was best I remember, because we had already signed the contract for building the first F-22s. And so we're well on our way to working that contract when they came down and said, you're going to have to cut your price. And we said, cut our price? You know, we can't cut our price. We have a contract. And they said, you don't seem to understand that if you don't cut your price, we're going to cut the airplane. And we said, well, since you've explained it like that. But they said, look, we're going to help you out. We're going to send you up to Pratt & Whitney and show you how what one company is doing. And they were the only one. Nobody at Boeing, nobody at General Dynamics, nobody at Northrop had picked up this. And so, since we at Lockheed had been working focused factories, we'd been doing tons of things, we thought they were helping it. But as it turned out, we were just skimming the top, because what the Japanese had been doing more and had been learned by MIT. They were taking the whole process and streamlining the whole process rather than just taking a little piece and focusing on improving a little piece. So the minute you walk into their plant, it was like a good automobile closing the door and you hear the sound. You know that it's quality by just hearing it. Well, you could just look at the factory and you knew that this was real. So I came back with a vengeance. By that time, I was president of the Total Aeronautics in Bethesda. Told them to go hire headhunters and hire anybody that knew this technology, a lot of which had been ex-Pratt & Whitney guys. And we were very lucky. I put one in each plant, and we began to revolutionize. And it's nothing but good common sense. It's just good common sense.
Done the right way.
And you get the hourly people involved. You put them in a room and say, look, this is a process. You work this process. So you tell us what we don't need to do. And everybody said, well, you're going to get rid of jobs when you do that. And my counter was, no, it's going to make us cheap enough to where we can get more business. And they bought it. Because they loved it, because now it was ergonomic. There's a term called 6S that's in the business that describes.
That's not your fault.
Yeah, I know. Is that
She'll get
Six Sigma?
No, I'll tell you the difference in that in a minute.
Is there a way we can mute it, or?
Just look and see if there's a way to mute it.
Or
She'll pick it up upstairs.
just if there's a real easy to unplug it, I do.
Yeah, just unplug it. Just lift it off of the thing and unplug it. Got it? Okay. I forgot where I was now.
You said something about 7S. You just
6S. And but it's basically, when you look at it, it's clean, it's efficient. So if you need an air hose, you don't have to walk the length of a football field to get the air hose. It's plumbed right in. You count the number of steps on every operation. You let the hourly people look at it and see what is wasted space, called MUDA, and let them collapse the processes together. And it's incredible what you can get rid of. An ordering system. We had an ordering system that the secretaries were not empowered to order pencils and paper. They would have to write a requisition that would go to their boss, who would be sent across the field 3 weeks. The guy would sign it. He would send it somewhere else. It would go in the mail to Ivan Allen and back again. Well, we got rid of all that. And we just said up to a certain level, a secretary can sign for it. Because what they were doing was hoarding it. They would hoard caches of pencils and paper so their engineers didn't run out. And so over and over, you begin to see what is just simple, good common sense. And so what the union person began to see was a very clean building. Everything spit polished. Everything was lighting. All the jigs were now made ergonomically so that he could easily do his job. He would never have to argue over parts because everything was kitted. And so it just went on and on and on and on. And basically, you just in the initial implementation, cut the cost 30%. That's just the beginning. And then you refine it and refine it and refine it, and they are partners in refining it. So our people they saw good food coming in the plant, they saw the ability to exercise, they saw people trying to take care of their health. We put them on smoking cessation programs. We saw a good place to work with good products to work on. And so literally, we didn't have any problems while I was president. So, and I think that goodwill probably still carries over until today.
One of the things that we have talked about was in the community and within companies is as you go along, you get to a fork in the road, and you can go this way or this way. During your tenure, you might want to just unplug it, Ty.
No, I'm going to shut the door.
Okay.
Unplug that phone.
Well, let's see real quick.
I unplugged that phone.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, battery.
Yeah.
It's the phone upstairs, the answer machine that
Okay.
he's hearing.
But you reach a fork in the road, and what we said when we started working on, and you may remember I talked to you, we started working on program to keep Dobbins open. You did that for the governor years before, and we learned from what you did. But what we understood was if Dobbins closed, we'd probably lose Lockheed and vice versa. So, and that would have been devastating to Cobb County. So somewhere down the road, so Lockheed is community. You made that point a little while ago. Was there a fork in the road that kept Lockheed open and therefore kept the community healthy? And you decided to take the right way as opposed to the wrong way, arguing with corporate or whatever. Sounds like you got the union on board with you. But was there ever a time where, and it may be negotiation with government, where you were able to keep a product line long enough for it to get healthy again? And you've sort of touched on some of that already. But fork in the road, is there anything you can think about?
Well, Lockheed Martin, in terms of the airplane business, in the mid-'80s was on its last leg. We produced some C-130Hs here in Marietta. Nearly every product line in California was going to zero and going into just maintenance. I mean, it was just going away. And the C-130 itself was, first designed in the 50s. So we had a product line. The only thing we were producing very many airplanes of was old. Now, before me, Ken Canestro saw and was aided and abetted by Dan Telep, our chairman, that something had to give for the C-130 to keep it a viable airplane, because it was a high-profit airplane because we sold it internationally. So he started and cut a deal with the Air Force, and this is sort of the why you're talking about. Cut a deal with the Air Force that they would consider the airplane if we would build it on our money. That if on our money we would develop what became the C-130J, then the Air Force would look at buying some. And we knew by that time that the Marine tankers were being held together by baling wire and chewing gum, and a lot of the National Guard airplanes were quite old, and there were a lot of C-130Es, real old airplanes out, and so we knew there was nothing in the way of competition from any of our competitors that would even challenge it. But nobody wanted to fly an old C-130H with steam gauges instead of the high-class glass displays. So Ken convinced the corporation to fund the development of the C-130. And so that, plus winning the F-22 and bringing the F-22 here, that's two that made up the move to the right direction. But the third one was the buying of the Fort Worth plant, which was a brilliant stroke for Lockheed Martin Aeronautics, because they had lost the last couple of competitions, and in fact they lost the F-22 and teamed with us as part of our team. But they had a third of the F-22, we had a third, and Boeing had a third. So when we purchased the Fort Worth plant, we ended up with 2/3 of the program, which is a big end of the stick. Plus we ended up with the F-16, which is probably one of the most lucrative programs that's been in the last several decades, because they built thousands of them, and it was still a hot commodity. Well, if you're trying to build a brand new C-130J, a new F-22, and a little bit later start the homework for the F-35, that requires a lot of seed money, which would have had to come out of our profit coffers. With Fort Worth generating huge profits, that profit came over to do the development, which put Lockheed in great stead and moved us from almost last in the airplane building business between the F-16, the F-22, the F-35, the C-130J, to the largest aeronautical building business in the world, or in the United States, in terms of military defense. So those were huge decisions that set us in good stead. But Lockheed has a history, until I think the most recent years, of being a family. The people look out after each other, they cared for each other, and even in the way in which we help people that were unfortunate, that worked there or even in our community. It was a big deal with us, with Bucks of the Month Club and other things that we did to help people.
You talked about the customer being the United States government.
Let me stop and get a swig here. If you'll just hand me that.
I'll just go.
Doing great, by the way.
Thank you.
We're trying to tie a lot of these interviews together by kind of the time frame. So when you go back and talk about the time frame where you had those forks in the road, generally where were they? And then the second part of that, did the community know that that was going on? I'm sure you guys talked to our congressman to get them to do what they could up there in Washington, D.C. So what was the general time frame, and talk a little bit about your relationship and the company's relationship with government?
I'm not sure. I still answer the time frame of.
The F-22 decision, the F-16
Okay.
decision,
All right.
where you really had, the company had to make a decision if it's going to put the money up and move forward.
And try and take us into the room where you were making the decision. Let us know, kind of what the stakes were at the time, what the emotions were at the time, how everybody was feeling. Try and bring us into the room that you're telling the story.
I think the first major decision on the F-22 was before we won. And I'll never forget, we were in the airplane with our chairman and chief operating officer, Dan Tellep, and my boss, Sherm Mullen, who was a straight arrow. And but he came from California, his California heritage, and Dan looked around and said, where should we build the F-22? Because the preponderance of executives were California executives and wanted to stay in California. And Sherm, without a minute's hesitation, said it needs to be built in Marietta, Georgia. He said, that's the place to build it. Now, it didn't hurt that Sam Nunn was a senator and had spent a lot of his career taking care of Lockheed Martin. And that sounds like it's a parochial, but it's really a relative thing. In California, the senators and congressmen never took care of us. They wouldn't even hardly darken our door. So if you needed anything done in Washington, Lockheed Martin, even though it was headquartered in California, had to go to Buddy Darden in the House of Representatives and Sam Nunn in the Senate to get things done. Now, both of them were on defense committees, and both of them were in powerful places, and both of them did the fair and right thing relative to our products, and sponsored the hometown products. So Lockheed Martin could not have done without either one, because they were just key. And that was when there was still pork. Today there's no pork. And Buddy Darden was perennially adding for the Guard and for the Air Force Reserve. Now you say, well, this is true. Is it really pork? An excess? Well, no, it wasn't. I mean, it was really the Air Force loved the airplanes. I mean, they wanted the airplanes, and they were more than happy to have us add the airplanes because it was over and above their budget. So they got airplanes that were not in their budget. So, I mean, it was, everybody was happy about it. But when the anti-pork came along, things had to change. But for a long, long time, our congressmen and senators, and then those that took their place, particularly in the Senate, those that took Sam Nunn's place, continued that legacy of helping out, keeping Marietta in defense, and keeping it on the front burner.
We interviewed Buddy Darden, by the way. It was a great interview. It really was a great interview. I should have said this at the beginning, and you could even go back in time. When you watch a documentary, and Ty's a pro of this, the stories intrigue people. And boy, have we heard some interesting stories. So up until this point, this is what Ty was getting at, were there any kind of meetings that were funny, or, somebody outside could almost put themselves inside of the meetings? And Ty mentioned that a little while ago. I don't know if there's just something that jumps out in your head right now up until that point. We've had people that, there was a great story about with John Williams, and he was hosting this party. It was supposed to be 200 or 300 people, and Isaacson was with him, and they were so excited. Well, Barry Goldwater decided he was going to show up, just uninvited. Of course, you're going to let him come, right? And so suddenly TV trucks, and next thing you know, the whole yard is covered with vehicles. And they went on to tell the story, but when everybody left, there was not anything left of their yard. They had completely resawed the whole yard, and they didn't have enough food for 800 or 900 people as opposed to 200. And Johnny was in there talking about making sandwiches and all that kind of stuff. Is there any such story that you can recall?
Yeah, but let me finish the first part of this verse about the keys. The second key fork in the road was the lean thinking. And lean thinking, and it all came about to reduce the overhead rates. And that revolutionized not only our plant, but it ended up, over the 5 years I was at corporate, working its way in throughout the entire corporation. So it was just a landmark change. Now, a lot of people said, well, is that the same as Six Sigma? No, it's not. Six Sigma is like looking through the opposite end of the barrel. You focus on one little piece and make it as good as you possibly can. Lean thinking is just turn that around. That you look through the little end toward the big end, and you're looking at the entire system. And you look at the system and see, hey, these several parts in here, I don't need it all. So no need to put Six Sigma on those parts. Let's just get rid of the part. Let's just get rid of that portion of the system until you get a system that is as compact as you can get it, and then you use Six Sigma on it. So it cut so much cost. It made Lockheed and its corporation extremely competitive. That would be the second, I think, major change. Let me see if I had another one in mind and I forgot what it was. Just a second.
If you can't recall, we can always just come back and add it in because this call will be slightly.
Okay, now tell me key me back to the question you just asked again.
Well, I was just asking if you could remember any
Okay.
stories.
All right, I'll tell you a story. After we moved the F-22 to Marietta, the corporation purchased the General Dynamics plant. And of course, the General Dynamics plant was extremely pretty. It was clean. All its processes were up to speed. Our processes in Georgia had atrophied because we didn't have a top of the line program. So we were going to have to put in new processes. So there was a lot of discussion about, well, what will Georgia major on and what will Fort Worth major on? And of course, it was not a question when Fort Worth was not a part. We had both fighters and transports in Marietta. So a lot of people said, well, why don't we move the fighter headquarters to Fort Worth and the transport headquarters to Marietta? And that drifted back to Washington. And so we were paid a visit by a staffer of a well-known senator who was very instrumental in seeing that we got our appropriations. And the staffer said, I don't want any Air Force people here in our meeting, and I only want the executives from Lockheed. And this was a very senior staffer. And he explained to us that the pointy end of the F-22 is going to roll out of Marietta. And if we had any other thought about that, there would be no F-22. And everybody said, yes, sir, 3 bags full. So that was the end of the F-22 not being assembled somewhere else other than Marietta.
That was a watershed kind of meeting, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
It was.
That's a great story.
I mean, I'll tell you offline who it was. It was Nunn's senior staff assistant.
Chief of staff or just senior staff?
No, it was his top guy. It was the guy that later became Assistant Secretary of Defense.
Okay.
I want to say Lowry, that's not right. Tall guy. Oh, his name will come to me in a minute. But he ended up the number 2 in the Department of Defense later. But it was very, very clear that, and said basically it was because of Sam Nunn that we had appropriations, and we needn't think that if this goes to Fort Worth that his support's going to continue. And of course Sam later, I didn't say that. So, of course. And
well, let me take you a little bit when we come back. However, what was the partnership like between what you were doing and Dobbins Air Reserve Base? Obviously, they fly C-130s there, and you manufacture them. So, it's always been tempting with the Dobbins people, come get one all J model, same thing with the Reserve. What was the partnership like between the two?
It was, at my level, there was hardly any interaction. That was handled by our facilities people, and we were basically tenants on their base. And as long as they provided us a runway, and we had our own fire department, our own police department, so there was very little we needed from them. And as long as the status quo was such that they provided that, we just had no, at least at my level, at the executive level, we never had any interaction with them.
At what point, what was the year you retired, and what was that decision like? You and Billy said, we've had enough of this, or Lockheed said, downsizing, or what exactly happened?
Well, the year I retired, I was 59, so I still had some years to go. And I had been sector president for 5 years. And there was one watershed that I didn't mention, so let me go aside now and mention what that is that I've already mentioned that our overhead rates were really an issue, had been for a long time. There was another major problem when we got the F-22, in particular in Georgia, that our systems had atrophied and had not been updated in a number of years and were not adequate for the F-22. And the problem with computers, as most people well know, is that if you get a computer program just in a few years, it's obsolete. Well, we wanted not only the latest and state-of-the-art of computer systems, the thing that I did not want was to have to update them. Now, it's naive to think they're not going to be updated, but what I wanted was a system where the guy that sold me the system was responsible for the update. And so we actually put out one of the largest proposals for systems in the industry for an enterprise resource plan. It's called an ERP. And SAP won the contract to do it. But basically, they put in new systems in every part of your company. It's not just engineering systems, but it's human resource systems, finance systems, administrative systems, and all of them talk and all of them integrate together. And so I set up a huge operation to do that over all of the aircraft companies so that everything is integrated, because I wanted to squeeze the last dollar out of the excess money that was being spent on upgrading this and upgrading that, and we needed to hire 5 people to do this, and I didn't want any of that. So that if you were IBM and you're responsible for X system, you not only sold me the system, you had to maintain it, and when you did version 2, 3, and 4, I got them. And they were totally integrated into my system. And so this was a major watershed for how we did business. Another little small aside, between ERP and Lean, I was so in love with it that it could be used by anybody. And so I was talking to the Wellstar CEO here in town. You talk about being a good neighbor. This was after I retired. And I think I'd maybe had to go to the hospital for something, and was not impressed with the treatment that I got. And so I said, and so I told him about Lean. He said, boy, I'd love to see that. And this is, all of a sudden I've lost his name, goes to our church. The administrator before.
One Tom Hill.
No, it was just before him.
Just before him.
Or after him, the small heart guy.
When he got killed.
No, the heart guy.
Yeah, I know.
He was in our business public affairs.
Sure. I'll think of his name in a minute.
I keep on saying Gwynn, but
he had a whole bunch of hospital systems that he.
No, that's Reynolds. It was just before Reynolds. This guy was purported to have had an affair or something with a lady on the board. But if you know him, you know it wasn't true.
Yeah.
And
I know. I can see him right now.
But anyhow, I was talking to him, and he said, boy, I'd love to see that. And so we took him out to Lockheed. I made arrangements to go out and with the current president that was out there. And they showed him what they were doing, and it was just incredible. I mean, it had moved so far from the time that I was there, in terms of you just go in, it looks like an operating room. It's so sterile and clean and optimized. So he brought it back to Wellstar and started implementing it. And later, Reynolds told me how many millions of dollars they had saved. But it's a huge amount that they saved at Wellstar by implementing lean in the medical field. Now that I've done that aside, I can't remember where I want to go back to.
That's okay. This is good stuff.
Yes, great stuff. I was chairman of the Wellstar Foundation for 3 years, and of course, Lockheed people were involved in the chamber. That was really well known. You guys going and helping Wellstar. It got a lot of PR in the business world. I don't know if you know.
Oh, I know what you did. You asked me about leaving. When I took over, the C-130J had not been sold. The F-22 was under development, or under production. Development toward production. We had won the contract, and it was being developed so we could eventually produce it. And the F-35, we were still in competition with Boeing. So, I mean, we had some really heavy breathers. So we had to make the first sale for the C-130J, and which I did with the Brits, and then later the Australians, because we went back to the Air Force and said, you said you'd buy some if we did it on our own nickel. Caught me at a bad time, we just don't have any money right now, and call me later. And so we couldn't call anybody later. We had to build the airplane. And so the four-star that was running the Air Force at the time said, I'd love to buy this airplane, but I just don't have the funds. But the Marines came on board, and then we got into the Guard and Reserve. Then the J was on its way. And so it's still being built today, probably 300 plus airplanes already. So that airplane was underway. We won, during my time at corporate, we won the Venture Star, which is a space shuttle replacement. And we just, nearly every program that we bid on, we won. So we had a great run. Unfortunately, there were some areas in the corporation that weren't doing as well. And so my CEO asked that we make up the difference. And we did that for 2 years running, and pretty well emptied the cabinet of any excess. And in the aircraft business, it takes 2 years to produce an airplane, from the time it's signed until materials delivered, it's manufactured, tested, and given over. It takes 2 years. So you can't just make up in a year what is there. And so, but the real issue boiled down to the C-130J, that I couldn't give him as much money the third year. And we had several programs delayed. And the C-130J program manager called me and said, we're $200 million overrun. And the corporation had to come up with that. And so that's nothing but pure profit. So that when you're barely getting by, and all of a sudden you hit it hard with $200 million hit, the board said something's got to change. And you'll read in my book the things around that. It's pretty nice. I had tons of nice things to say. The Air Force, or a lot of our customers, couldn't believe that I was asked to retire. And also they asked the COO to retire at the same time. So, but if I was in my CEO's shoes, I don't know that I blame him, because he has a board to answer to, and he has stockholders to answer to, and we didn't make our numbers. And so it's pretty simple. That other stuff you did for me yesterday is what you did today that counts. And so I had already spent, the F-35 was already won, in my opinion, because a little more interesting story is Boeing bought their way back into the F-35 program, because McDonnell Douglas won the neck down with Lockheed. And Boeing came to the Air Force and said, can we have a dollar contract and produce the same things the other two guys are going to do? And if we do, would you consider our airplane? And the Air Force said yes. So they were back in it, another three-way run for the F-35. And the down selected McDonnell Douglas out. They took a Harrier airplane approach to lift the airplane off with jets. And we had a total unique concept, which was a Russian concept. We bought the rights to a Russian concept that had a fan right behind the pilot that was perpendicular to the ground to lift the airplane off. And so we ended up competing with Boeing. But we never could figure out how Boeing got in the mix because they didn't have a horizontal tail. And the Air Force had told us on no uncertain terms on the F-22, you have to have a horizontal tail. If the engine goes out, you can't cant the engine back and forth to land this airplane because it's a dead engine. So you don't have enough tail power. And so they never had a tail. So we never could figure it out. Halfway through the program, they came to the Air Force and said, we need to add a tail. Well, we were smart enough in that program because Lockheed lost a lot of money on the first program. It's called cost share. That means we had to put our money up. The Air Force did not have enough money to fund the development of the F-22. And essentially the contractors had to pay for the engine development. And so we said, we don't want to do that again because we didn't get our bait back on the F-22. You kept cutting them from nearly 1,400 airplanes down to 183. And so whatever money you give us, we want that to be whatever we produce to be competed with somebody else. And so the government agreed. And so when Boeing came up and said they wanted to put a tail on, the Air Force leaned all over us to open the contract up to allow Boeing to subsidize their contract and build an airplane with a tail on it. And I remember the meeting I was in. Vance Kaufman, our CEO, almost like Khrushchev, took his shoe off and beat on the table, over my dead body, we're going to open this contract up. And I knew that when we had held that position, we had won because they would not have data. They could get all the wind tunnel data they wanted, but they would not have flown an airplane that had a tail.
What year was that, Nicky, roughly?
That was roughly 1998, 1999. So, so we had moved the aeronautics sector to efficiency. We had put in new programs. We had won a ton of new things. But there's a real downside with winning new things because there's lots of places that can go bad or they can run afoul or be delayed. And that's sort of what I got caught in in the end. And when I left on good terms with everybody. But I really was given offers to come back in. I consulted for Lockheed for 2 years, but there were so many other things I wanted to do, and that's another chapter I'll get into in a second. But I have no regrets whatsoever. I loved every minute that I was at Lockheed, and loved the people I work with, loved the family, and I love the things we did and accomplished.
What year was your retirement?
2000, early 2000. It was in January of 2000. And
what do you consider? You went through a lot of accomplishments, but looking back on the Lockheed side, what would you say your top 3 accomplishments were? What are you most proud of? If you go in my office home, I got all kinds of stuff, but there are a few things that really stick out. What would you? Well,
I'm most proud of winning the F-22 because, as I said earlier, when I went over the program, I thought it was lost. But there were some tons of great people. And so our corporation had the foresight to put good leadership, not just me, into the program. And we pulled it out of the fire and won going away. So, I mean, it was the perils of Pauline. We delivered the data to the Air Force at the last second to go into the competition. I mean, it was just the perils of Pauline. So I am most proud of having, because the F-22, without winning it, we would have been sucking wind on trying to get all the other stuff pushed. But having won that was a vehicle to modernize everything. The second thing I'm most proud of is the application of lean and building an efficient plants aeronautical group together and having it just hum and putting in great people. I mean, I had a habit that was called my yellow pad that I carried everywhere. And people, I was told later after I retired that people put a bounty on the yellow pad, that if they could steal it, they would give them all a bounty, because basically every morning we met at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, and we gave out action items that had to be closed. And so I wrote your name down, and I wrote what you were to deliver and when. And I would also write down anybody I saw in a meeting I was in, or at another company, or wherever it was, that I thought was a good guy, because I was going to steal him. And I stole my great share. So a ton of people that are currently in the executive ranks at Lockheed, I stole. And it's the same way with Lean, by getting in people that knew what they were doing and turning them loose and revelashing. That would have been another, what I would call a great accomplishment. Those would be my best. And also setting up to win the F-35, because I really worked hard at getting partners. And by that I mean the F-22 had two partners, General Dynamics and Boeing on our side. McDonnell had Northrop. And they had a good airplane. We had figured out how to do something called integrated product teams, which revolutionized, by the way, how teams work in a big program like that. And we in the F-22 pioneered that and developed it. But as you look, let's see, I lost my train of thought. Excuse me a second, let me just think about it.
I wasn't being rude. I was looking for the name of the president's Wellstar. That's what I was.
Did you find it?
Yeah, I did. I'm gonna pull it back up again while you're thinking. Just keep, if it comes to you, just keep thinking. Here we go. Down.
I was going to tell you a funny, and I forgot what it was. Ty, can you remember where I was going?
The F-35, winning that.
Well, the F-35 was it was your third accomplishment, and it was a function of having three partners versus two partners.
Oh, that's what it was. That's what it was. And the importance of setting up the partners. The people that we, of course, it's not only what you do, but it's what you make the other guy do or not do. And so the first thing we wanted to do was, since Boeing's concept for the F-35 for the Marines used the Harrier concept, the thing we wanted to do was to separate British Aerospace from Boeing, because British Aerospace had been the natural partner of McDonnell Douglas. But it turned out that Boeing did not use many McDonnell Douglas people on the F-35. They used their transport people, which was a terrible flaw on their part, I think. But so we courted the British Aerospace people. So I got to know a lot of them when I was selling the C-130 to the British, the Royal Air Force. And as a result, I got to know their chairman, John Weston. And so, would you mind handing me that water again? Thank you. I got to know their chairman, John Weston, and so we cut a deal for him to come on the Lockheed Martin team, and of course bring all the Marine interactions that had with the U.S. Marines, as well as that technology for what is called vertical takeoff and landing, and deny Boeing from being able to have all of that technology. At the same time, I mentioned earlier that I went to the University of Alabama, and we had a small graduating class in aeronautical engineering, but two of them, one of them was Bill Lawler, and Bill Lawler was my classmate. He went on to Northrop and became head of the B-2, and then he became my counterpart within Northrop, head of their aeronautical companies. So here you had two Alabama grads out of the same small class, and he was a good friend. And so Bill and I got together. Earlier, we got together because Lockheed and Northrop considered merging. And we were going to merge the two aeronautical sectors. And basically, I was going to become CEO of a new corporation, the Aeronautical Corporation. Turned out the government, after a year, turned thumbs down. But I got reacquainted with Bill Lawler. And Bill came to see me one day and he said, look, we need to work. Can we be a subcontractor for the F-35 if you win? And it's such a huge program. I mean, it's going to be 4,000 plus airplanes that there's no way, even with a couple of facilities, to generate all that we needed. So I said, make me a business case. And so he did. We saw it was in the benefit of our team. Plus, they were just like us. There were people that thought like us, felt like us. I mean, they were just like other Lockheed people. I mean, Northrop was a great company, but we hated Boeing. I mean, Boeing, we couldn't stay in the ground they walked on. And so we did. We cut a deal with both Northrop and British Aerospace. And that teaming arrangement was one large adjunct, because we sort of cornered the existing stealth airplanes. And most people don't realize that Boeing has never made a sonic boom. I mean, they've not built a modern fighter other than their piece of the F-22, where they provided some structures. But that doesn't mean they're not a good company. But there's a lot goes into winning a program. And winning a program is your partners and having compatible partners. Boeing was not a compatible partner. They were hard to deal with on the F-22. So I think setting up the F-35 with partners, with bringing in, getting all three of our companies harnessed, the Skunk Works, Fort Worth, and Georgia, which was doing the F-22, because there was a lot of I'm in charge type stuff in the beginning, but getting that team working cohesively together was a major, major accomplishment.
You changed history. You did things that could have taken Lockheed down the drain or taken a different direction. People may have not had the jobs that did have jobs. The F-22 has fought in wars. You created the standard in the industry. It's still, I think, the most sophisticated airplane in the world. You changed history. That's why you're a godfather. How does it make you feel to know that you changed history?
Well, I'm very humble, because I always want to make a correction that no one person ever does anything in this kind of business. I mean, I had a lot of people that are, quote, the father of the F-22. And I mean, my former boss, his boss, I mean, all these people were incredible brains and made the F-22 what it is today. I just came along at a time that I could use my talents to push it on over the goal line. And so from that standpoint, I'm extremely proud of having done that. And I'm extremely proud of getting the C-130J. That first signature is mine, and getting it sold. But again, behind that is Ken Canestra having the foresight to know that we needed to modernize the airplane, convincing the Corp that we had to do it, and on and on and on. I'll tell you another inside story that goes along with that. Right after I became president and had moved over from the F-22, Ken was now my boss as, quote, sector president. The marketing people came roaring in and said, we have a proposal we want to drop on the Air Force, unsolicited proposal to build yet another C-5. And I'll just call it the C-5C. I'm not sure that was the designation. But this would be put brand new engines, new commercial engines on. And before, they were military design engines, and they were always needed tinkering with. Well, the commercial engines were really high productivity engines, and they would make a C-5 a hot rod. And not only that, we would provide it at a fixed cost. So the Air Force said, I want 10 of them. We multiply that times fixed cost. That's all you ever pay, and we'll deliver you the airplanes. And it was an incredible airplane. But I had just rolled off of the F-22, sweet talking the Air Force, 90-0, because our legacy in the Air Force was not good. The C-5B was sold over their dead body. They wanted the C-17 so bad they couldn't stand it. And the operating Air Force did not want any more C-5s. Well, Larry Kitchen, our then CEO, and Bob Ormsby, the president of the company here, took it upon themselves to go sell it to Congress, and did, for another 50, round number 50 airplanes. And the Air Force just didn't forgive us. I mean, they were holding, I mean, they were just, you go up to, if you had to go to the Material Air Command headquarters, they would just turn their backs to you when you walked down the hall. I mean, it was really bad. So I couldn't afford that if we were going to win the F-22. So I had to smooth all the Air Force people really big time to make sure that they would be willing to pick us. So here I come into the job, and the guys want to unload another bomb after we've just now got the F-22 underway. And I said, give me the proposal. I'm going to lock it up in my safe, and it ain't going to see the light of day. And get me an appointment with the 4-star head of MAC, and whose name I just now forgot. And I want to go see him and tell him I have it, and that I'm going to keep it locked up. Because, see, they never trusted us after that. I mean, the Air Force just didn't trust us because they thought we'd take a back door. And Lockheed had a powerful back door. Mm-hmm. So I go up to see the 4-star general, and I said, I'd like you to run everybody out, just me and you, no horse holders. And I got something I want to share with you. And so I told him about the C-5 proposal that had been prepared, and I was sure he had heard about it, but I wanted to tell him that I needed his support on the F-22, even though he wasn't in a direct chain of command. He later became Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And but I said, I need your support on the C-130J. I want you to help me on it, and so that we produce an airplane that the Air Force will buy. Because up to that time, we had not produced an airplane the Air Force would buy, because we didn't want the Air Force to piddle with it, because we wanted them to buy more H's. So I said, I'm going to lock it up in my safe. If you ever want to see it, call me, and I'll give it to you. And he said, I really appreciate it. And not only that, I will start bringing my people into Marietta to look at what you're doing on the C-130J, and we'll produce an airplane the Air Force wants to buy. All good. Year passes, and I get this phone call, Fogelman, General Fogelman was his name, from General Fogelman. He says, Mickey, I want you to submit the unofficial proposal for the C-5C. It may not have been called a C, it might have been a D, I can't remember. But I want you to submit it. And I said, General Fogelman, you understand, this is a great airplane. I mean, this is a hot rod. You're going to love this airplane when you see it. But I promise you, I won't market it. I won't be out beating the bushes with Congress thing. I'll do just exactly what you say. I'll be a good contractor. And so I did, and we gave it to him. Well, the Air Force acquisition people almost had apoplexy, because they just knew we were going to make an end run and go to Congress with this proposal. We didn't. We stayed cool. So 3 or 4 months later, didn't hear anything, and all of a sudden I get this phone call from the Undersecretary of the Air Force for Acquisition. Said, Mickey, I'd like you to come up. I want to talk to you about the C-5 proposal. And I said, okay. So I went up to see her, and she said, we really like this proposal. And said, but we're going to buy the C-17s, but we really like the engines. And what we'd like to do is entertain a sole source proposal, or entertain a proposal to, I'm sorry, she didn't say that. She said, what I'd like to do is consider the C-5 with these new engines. And so I was already counting my contract money. And then she lowered the boom and said, we'd like you to give us the drawings for the C-5 so we could compete it out. Well, that was almost like saying a cuss word. And I'd already done my homework. And what most people don't know is that in the first C-5B program, they kept telling Bob Ormsby, you're going to lose your shirt, Bob. You're going to lose your shirt, fixed price. And then we started making lots of money. And the Air Force came down and said, we want you to give back some. We said, wait a minute, this is a fixed price contract. You told me I was going to lose money. They said, doesn't make any difference. I'll cancel the program. You give some more back. And we had to give back around $200 million of profit on the C5B. And I said, Miss Drillion, you took back $200 million worth of profit, and you want me to give you the drawings? Because at that time, the contractor owned the drawings. It's not the same today. You have to deliver the drawings. But we own the drawings, so they didn't have any official drawings. I said, I'll be willing to sell them to you for $200 million. She was not very happy with that response and pretty well asked us to leave. So, but we had a great guy that was in charge of the C5. His name was Bill Arndt, great program manager. And so she called him back in a couple of weeks and said, come on up, let's negotiate a sole source contract. And thus we had a huge string of C5 mods for a number of years, which was very lucrative.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Have you ever seen the C5? It goes over, it goes, it is a monster. I've had a chance to climb up on one. I don't know how it flies, to be honest with you. It's so huge. Did you have anything to do with the remods, the wings, and was that contract in the works?
No, the wings were all done before I came on the con.
All right, I want to talk about Southern Poly and KSU. There is a story, whether it's valid or not, that basically Southern Poly existed to support Lockheed, or at least that was a big part of what it did. I'm sure it affected KSU, but probably more Southern Poly. Do you have any knowledge of that relationship?
No, I don't. We liked the people from Southern Poly because they were what I call dirty fingernail engineers. The Georgia Tech guys, in particular if they went on to get their master's and their doctorate, were pretty expensive guys and were more research oriented. Even though we had a modicum of research, most of what we did was really manufacturing, engineering, and electronics and avionics and the stuff that where you're building and testing stuff. And so the guys at Southern Poly that was right down their wheelhouse. So we always had a good relationship with them and recruited their people fairly heavily. But other than that, the stories that you'll have to go back to are and I suspect that whoever was president of Lockheed Georgia at the time was a member of the Business and Public Affairs who was instrumental in bringing Southern Poly to Marietta. And I suspect whoever that president was in there pretty deep trying to make that happen.
Mickey, while your tenure was going on, who do you recall as the most important community leaders? Obviously, based on your story, a lot of what you had to do was keep programs around, introduce lean, all focused on your ultimate customer. And you were real clear that that's where your focus was. Do you recall people who, maybe it's secondhand knowledge, were the leaders in Cobb County?
No, I must admit that we, even when I was president, we paid virtually no attention to any of the people in the city council or the Cobb County government. We just they didn't affect anything. So therefore we didn't spend time with them. If we saw them at church, we'd socialize with them, like Governor Barnes would now go to church together. But as far as an interaction that had anything to do with business, very little. My first interaction came right after I retired. And I did not know Bill Dunaway at the time. I knew who he was. I knew what he'd done. That he ran the 1848 house and been a druggist. And he was running for mayor about the time I retired. And so he called me wanting some money. And I said, Bill, I don't know very much about you, but one of the things that I know you really need for the city is you need to have a strategic plan of where you're going to go. So what is your vision for the plan of the city of Marietta? I'll give you some money, but I need to know what it is before I give it to you. And Bill was very honest, and he said, look, Nick, he said, I'll be very honest with you. I don't have that plan, but I'll guarantee you the day that I'm elected, I will start putting that plan together. And so if you'll just trust me that I'll put that together, I promise you that is one of the first things I'll do. So Bill was elected. The next day he called me. He said, Mickey, you remember that strategic plan we talked about? And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, I want you to head it up. And so
It worked that way.
it works that way. So I ended up heading for 6 or 7 years the Marital Redevelopment, and then it became the Redevelopment Authority and passed it on to others. But all the initial work was our committee, and I'd like to talk about that if I could sometime.
Sure. Before you leave that, you had a distinguished career. Behind every good man is a good woman. Talk about Billy for just a little bit.
Okay. Well, the Lord knew that as strong-willed as I am, that I'd have to have somebody to match. And I met my match in Billy. But we have been married now nearly 57 years. And I'm in love with her as much as I was back then. She has been a terrific wife. I don't know how she became as accomplished as she did. But when we were in 8th grade, I mentioned that we were sweethearts. I was a valedictorian, she was a salutatorian. And this is a little country high school. And we were in Beta Club, National Honor Society together. But Billy has a knack for being able to move around a lot of different kind of people, because we've had the opportunity to be with princes and kings and queens and entertain them. And she's just as comfortable doing that as you could ever hope for, and very good at it. And she was extremely good as a president's wife when I was at Lockheed, entertaining, making sure when we went to Paris air shows and things like that, that every international general and potentate was cared for. And she's a great mother. She absolutely keeps me straight. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt about it. She's also has a very similar faith that I do. She became a Christian very early in her childhood, as I did, and we have both been active Christians for since I was 13, and probably about the same year we both accepted Christ, and both have been active in church. I don't know, I've been teaching Sunday school for 50 years, and most of it with young adults. And so she's become the mother to I don't know how many young adults in not only Cobb County, but I could just list them on, and you would know many of them that came up in our young adult classes and have gone on to bigger and better things in Cobb County. So she's made a tremendous impact with other people as well as with our own children. As I said, we have 2 children together, Billy and I, and 2 girls. Both have, by the world's measure, would be very successful. Both of them are Christians. We have 4 great-grandchildren. My oldest grandchild, Cecilia, just graduated magna cum laude from the University of Alabama. So I'm very proud of my grandchildren. She's a good grandmother. So if I were to write a spec for what a good wife would be, and what Solomon did, I think, in the Bible, she would be the girl of my dreams, and still mad in love with her.
Somebody interviewed my wife Pam one time about what she thought might be her biggest role, and she said, "You're out there all the time. You think you're big shot. My job is to ground you."
Hey, amen.
So you made a big impact on the community, and you started to talk about Bill Dunaway, who was a good interview. So tell me some other things you've done in the community to make it better, and tie it to a time frame if you can. Okay.
Well, when I retired in 2000, I started to work for Bill. And at the same time, I got another big job, and I'll talk about that. But at the same time, I got another big job from the governor, Governor Roy Barnes. So with the city, our little city had just turned into really sleepy. The downtown was decaying, the Strand was closed, and homeless people lived in it, and hardly any restaurants that you would go eat in. It was just a very sad situation. And so I put together a team of about 30 people from all walks of life in Cobb County. superintendent of schools, from representatives from the police, representatives from the housing authorities, representatives from urban planning, realtors. I mean, it's just a huge cross-section of our society within Marietta. And then I said, what I really want, and then I cut a deal with Otis Brumby. And I said, Otis, I can't let you in this meeting. This is not an official city committee. And I want people to be able to talk freely. And if you have a reporter stuck in there, they're not going to talk freely. But I will promise you, the minute that they leave, I will summarize what was said in the meeting and any issues, and I will call your reporter and give you, give you the information. So you will never be left without not knowing what's going on. He said, fine. And I never had a minute's trouble in the years that I did the Marietta Redevelopment Authority. And what we did is we invited the community to all come in and tell us what the problems were. What are the problems with the kind of student we have in school? What are the problems with the housing that we have across from the conference center that's so decayed and bad? Why is it like that? Do we not have code enforcement? And so we ended up making a lot of changes in laws for Marietta, like in code enforcement and how it's done, adding more people, and putting in an ombudsman to handle contractors. When they said, we don't want to come to Marietta because it's too hard, and you take everything we've done and redo it. And we have to go this place, that place, and that place. And we hired a person that would, city hired a person who was responsible for that. I wrote a strategic plan for him as a sort of a tongue-in-cheek. We went off to Chattanooga and looked at a strategic plan and actually developed a strategic plan. We went to cities like ours, like Chattanooga, Denver, Savannah, and other places, and carried the city council or portions of them and some of our committee to see how other people were doing it. We ended up hiring the guy that handled a lot of the low-income stuff out of Chattanooga. He's now in my church, that is now in town in Marietta. So we, again, stole people. And so we had a good time putting together plans. And I presented about 100 view graph, or at that time it was PowerPoint, presentations to the city council in session. Never, I can't ever remember doing one over 30. I mean, that's an effort. But because we not only programmed or discussed what the problems were, we gave solutions. This is what we would recommend that you go do. And I got a standing ovation from everybody that was in the audience for what our committee had done, and they had worked hard. We had people like Hap Smith, Ray Boudet. Those are just, and Ray went on from that job to be head of the Marietta Housing Authority. And so we just had a great group of people that worked hard. And then later on, the Marietta Corporation came in and started buying land, which is now paid off because now we're building on that land, even though we had to go through the doldrums of the 2007-2008 recession. But now that which they purchased is blossoming into new homes, and we got rid of, and also Franklin Road was our first purchase. That was the first thing that we did, was go in and try to clean up Franklin Road and try to clean up the apartments on Powder Springs Road, which are now demolished and are awaiting new homes. So we got a tremendous amount done. The second thing was, and we started the Strand. I was on the original board that started the Strand. And for a lot of those organizations, I led the strategic planning for them. I did the strategic plan for the museum, or led it, and helped with the Strand. I did the one for the city of Marietta, and there's several more that I can't remember now. Some in Atlanta, the Atlanta Botanical Gardens, because I had done a lot of that at Lockheed, so it was a skill that I could use. But Roy Barnes was governor of the state of Georgia at the time, and when I came back, he said, Mickey said, I'd really love you to take over and be the head of the committee that oversees the military in the state of Georgia. It's called the Georgia Military Affairs Committee. And so I said, well, what does it entail? And he says, well, it's overseeing it, and I got a feeling there's going to be some issues. And I said, well, Roy, you're absolutely correct. because the government has already reduced the number of people in the armed services, but they have not reduced the footprint. And I said the footprint's killing them in terms of overhead and in terms of money that they're having to spend for excess facilities. So we're going to have a BRAC called Base Realignment and Closing. Let me stop there and get some more water.
That was a critical role, because had it not done what it did, we could have lost more than
It's incredible.
David.
Because I said, look, nobody started working on it yet, but I'm telling you, it's coming. It's right around the bend, because they can't afford not to. And sure enough, 3 years later, it came. So we had a great guy that was sponsored by the chamber, a former brigadier general that was employed by the chamber in Atlanta. And so he was a director and reported to me, and he had a sidekick. And so the three of us planned how to attack it. And we toured and went to every military base in Georgia. And what we asked was for them to BRAC themselves, look at the list of questions that were going to be asked, and then for them to answer it themselves and grade their deficiencies, and then come forward with the things that it would take to fix those deficiencies. And they did. And then they came forward, we took a look at it, we assembled them, and then I called the governor and said, Governor, we need to assemble all the congressmen and senators in Washington. That's when Zell was senator. And I said, I need to brief them on the state of their facilities in their districts and the problems they have. Because one of the keys to the BRAC is you can't promise to spend money on something. That doesn't count. It's got to be existing when they look at it. And so we need to get some money. And we ended up with $500 million. They put in $500 million worth of pork and to fix the problems. I mean, and we had some terrible problems. We had the major communication facilities for the Army was in a ditch at one of, pardon?
It was Fort Bragg? Not Bragg, Benning.
At Fort Benning. It was concrete block. The roof leaked, and they had visqueen plastic draped over all the relays to catch the water. And this was the classified communication for the U.S. Army. I mean, and they had wood buildings that had rotted so bad, the threshold had reduced so that the trucks could not drive under it to be maintained. I mean, it was just paint peeling off barracks. And so we took pictures of all of it. I went up, I got them all behind it, and then we parceled out jobs to all their staffers. You need to go, we need to fix this, this, and this. This is your job to fix it, and you need to report back, just like running a program. Because that was the beautiful thing about it is, I knew all the military people. And I took Roy up to meet all the people in the Department of Defense. And Roy's an incredible guy. And so Roy's message was, look, we love the military. We love the military. And we went to see the secretary. I knew all the secretaries. We went to the secretaries, went to the 4 stars, head of services that had installations here. And we told our message that we're way ahead of time. We're going to fix your bases. And the one in particular, I carried lean to Warner Robins. Because we lost Warner Robins in the middle of Georgia. We were dead as a state. So, and Warner Robins had a general there that was enlightened. Most of them just do stuff to get promoted. This guy understood. And I can't remember his name, but he understood. And so he took off, and I gave him people, resources, that he could call on as consultants to come do it, and he did it. In fact, he improved Warner Robins so much that the Air Force took notice, promoted him, and put him over all of the facilities, the maintenance facilities in the U.S. to bring lean into all the others. The Marines did the same thing at Albany. They put lean in, and immediately they saw the increase in the productivity over lean. And the paint and all that kind of stuff all got fixed. So when the BRAC got here, we got all the people that were going to present to BRAC. I made them come to Atlanta. I made them present to me as though I was the BRAC. And I gave them a raw hiding if they needed it. Some of them did. Some of them felt like, they'd been a colonel and they needed to be cowed to, and and so they needed some correction. So, and we did beautifully. And the things that we lost, and everything we lost had a second life that was beautiful second life. The one that we missed, still missed it, even though we ended up with more jobs in Georgia as a result, was the one that Jimmy Carter intervened, and some of the work that should have gone to the sea base at St. Mary's went to Rhode Island. And that was only because he intervened and said you need to send it to Rhode Island, which I'm not a fan of Jimmy Carter. But I'm very proud of the things we accomplished in the BRAC and getting our bases in great shape. And then I turned it over to Brent Brown, and he went on from there. So.
I worked real closely with him. I took on that same responsibility, as you probably know, you probably read. Took on that responsibility without any money for just our base and Dobbins. And we've done a lot of stuff. We hired ex-BRAC commissioners to come in and look at, basically do what you did around the state. Really peel it back and look at what's good, we need to keep, what's bad, we need to quit doing, and that kind of stuff. And we had a report, it was about a 100-page report, and then started implementing them. And one of the things we were really deficient in was community support. Although we did a lot, it wasn't understood. And the base wasn't understood. I went up with Tom Price's help, met with 4 members of the House Armed Services Committee. They thought Dobbins was a sleepy little base with 7 C-130Hs. And if you closed it down, so what? Cobb County is a wealthy community, and so forth and so on. So it was your work was legendary, and we copied a lot of what you did.
Good.
In fact, had a meeting with Senator Perdue, and his vision for fixing us up was to basically find out what the new BRAC would look at, and then have teams go around the state with the new elements of BRAC and define what needed to be improved, what needed to be closed, and do it in advance of a BRAC action. And Governor Deal was just not a fan of doing something with BRAC.
He was not. I mean, as a personal aside, Deal was in the group that I briefed, and he never seemed to be interested. Now, believe it or not, Governor Perdue didn't seem to be all that interested until one day I told him, I said, look, you're going to be blamed when this first base gets closed. Guess whose name's going to be tagged with it? Right. And so he got in gear, and literally I took him up to Washington and showed him around. He had the same message.
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
that saved a lot of jobs. We don't know. Let me see what else I got here. We've touched on just about everything I had. I think we've covered everything. Back to think of it.
Yeah. Do you want to just go through some names and see?
Yeah. Otis Brumby.
Yeah.
Tell us about, you obviously handled that one. We've talked to 25 people, and we've heard a lot of stories about Otis. Some people hate him, and they told stories about why they hate him. Some people loved him, and they told stories about why they loved him. So say a few words about Otis and your relationship with Otis.
Well, I wouldn't say with Otis Brumby, I wouldn't say mine is either hate nor love, but respect. Otis was a newspaper man first and foremost, and I mean he'd sell his firstborn if he had to publish what I think is what he believed is the honest news. So, as in most people, I think you can have your most success if you work with people rather than against people. Now, that doesn't mean you give in or anything like that, but you work with them. And so I knew that we had a problem with Otis on the Marietta redevelopment, and so I worked with him. He was totally satisfied, and when he knew that he wasn't going to miss out on anything, he was perfectly happy to let it function as it did. And I haven't had a lot of interaction with him on other things, but my relationship with him has always been one of mutual respect. And
well, my experience with him and a lot of others is you don't hide anything from him. He had this sense that something was being hid.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't tell him a lie or anything that looked like a lie, misleading or whatever, or you'd be in trouble. And then the third thing is, once he had decided what was good or bad, you better not disagree with him. After he dug himself in and he was convinced that you were a good guy, if I came in and said you're not a good guy, boy, he would come after you. So that was my.
Well, you can disagree with him, but it doesn't have to be fraught with emotion. There are those during the last years on a lot of committees I was on that disagreed with him violently on a lot of the redevelopment, and I disagreed with him. But that doesn't mean that you have to get emotional and start a war. It just means that you have different opinions on things, because I think Otis was wrong when he wouldn't let us do the tax incremental financing, or also known as TAD, for the tax allocation district for our first project. And by him coming against it, and of course Atlantic Station, look at Atlantic Station today, I mean, it's a paragon of using that way of funding. And we didn't have any money. Marietta didn't have any money. So it had to find money from somewhere. And that was a great way to do it. And the problem was that it kicked us into the recession. And it went from a very grand plan to a very scaled down plan of just condos and small homes and a shop or two, when it could have been a whole shopping center and other things had we been able to use tax increment financing. So I think he was always right, no. But I do think that he articulated his convictions and didn't hesitate to do so. But he respected yours. If you had different opinions, he didn't say ugly things about you. Well, I mean, he didn't say you were a bad guy.
Roy Barnes.
Mm-hmm.
Roy,
I have the highest respect for Roy. I think Roy is a Renaissance man. Roy, I know him. I've known him for many years now. But he was prescient in realizing there was something bad going to happen to our bases if we didn't get somebody to fix it, somebody that knew what they were doing. And so he chose good people. And not only that, he let us take our head and do the right things as long as we kept him briefed. But over time, the issues that Roy took on were hard issues, and I really respect him for doing it. I don't know any of them that I disagree with him with. But I mean, today I'd love to have a ring road outside 285. The whole, to get rid of traffic. I mean, that was where he didn't get it made. I think he had it
reelected. We would have it right now.
We would have it now, but what he did with the flag had to be done. We had to put diversity behind the racism behind us, and I just think he's a brilliant man.
He got the teachers on his bad side too.
He did. I mean, there was some things that some of his support people did not were not a good credit to him.
One of the good interviews we had was with Buddy Darden.
Mm-hmm.
You had a chance to deal with Buddy when you were at Lockheed. Your thoughts about Buddy Darden?
Well, Buddy comes over as an all shucks guy, and but I don't know anybody in their dog's name that he doesn't remember. And I mean, he can see you 20 years later and he'll know your dog's name, all your children, where they went to school. Buddy has a terrific recall memory. Buddy also was a strong supporter of defense. He was a strong supporter of Lockheed Martin. I mean, that was his job as our congressman, and he executed. And I supported him in his losing bid. I mean, nominally I'm a Republican, but I also support conservative Democrats, and I view Buddy as one of those.
Yeah, same here. Let's see, Earl Smith, did you have much interaction with Earl?
Yes, I did have a good bit of interaction with Earl Smith, but it nearly all had to do with the Strand. And, Earl was, I don't think he went into the Strand thinking he was going to be elected chairman, but it didn't take long to do that. And so I got to work with Earl for, a half dozen years, putting the Strand together and getting it on its feet. And I mean, what a venue that we have today that is now paid for. And I mean, it was a struggle to get it paid for. But a lot of people, that don't know that, what's Philip's last name?
Goldstein.
Most people don't know that Philip Goldstein was a heavy contributor to getting, not only does he own the Strand, but he was a heavy contributor to making sure that it stayed the Strand. He really went above and beyond to make that happen.
John Williams, do you have any interaction with John Williams?
No.
Let me ask this question.
Chuck, wait, before we go, Chuck Clay.
Yeah, Chuck, I was a strong supporter of Chuck. I didn't, for when he ran for the House of Representatives. In fact, I had the kickoff here. All the interviews were done here in my house that he went on television with. But I didn't know Chuck very well and did not have a lot of business dealings with him. So I really can't comment too much other than at the time I thought he was the best candidate to run and supported him. But that's about it.
Yeah. You were going to say, I'm sorry.
One of the things we hear is this idea of the Cobb way of doing things, which is kind of when you have a big project or a big issue, you kind of get all the relevant parties involved to kind of just sit around a table and sort of discuss it that way, as opposed to like doing it through the media or doing it through kind of back channels or stuff like that. And can you help me articulate?
Yeah, no, Roy said that. And by virtue of my role at Georgia Power Company, the Atlanta Regional Commission, and other things, Cobb is a little unique. And you were part of that. We had almost a business way of looking at issues. You know, we'd sit down and talk about them and do what's right for Cobb. And Roy brought it up. It was called the Cobb way of doing things. And it was patterned by a lot of things probably you did, Lockheed, and other business leaders who had the best interests of Cobb County in mind when they did things. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, I've never heard it referred to as the Cobb way, but it's quite obvious that it does exist. If I were to ask where the pedigree came from, and of course it's a very limited view, I would go all the way back to the Kiwanis Club Business and Public Affairs, because that's the pedigree of every Lockheed president has always been a member of a special committee of Kiwanis called Business and Public Affairs, whose mission in life was to bring business to Cobb County, or for something needed fixing, that they would figure out a way to fix it, because many of them were the powerful people in our community, either due to influence, power, or money. And so, so many things like the Southern Poly coming, KSU coming, those were all a product of the Kiwanis Club. Roads getting fixed and changed were a product of the Kiwanis Club. Trolley coming to Marietta was Kiwanis Club. So over and over, and these were people that had interest, and they varied from, and they went from superintendents of schools to Cobb County commissioners, to city councilmen, to executives, to presidents of Lockheed. That's what comprised this committee. Now that's the one that I'm associated with, and I do know it to be true, that when there's a problem, they come together and discuss it. The other example is we have a lot of lore within our community as a result of being aircraft oriented. I mean, the bomber plant started here in World War II, and so a lot of things came as a result of the bomber plant. And so a couple of people had a vision to build the Aviation Museum. And so to get that off the ground, what did they do? I guess it's the Cobb way. They got all those same people together and say, how do we build an aviation museum? And lo and behold, it took flight.
Do you know who started that initiative?
I do not. I would guess it would be Bob Ormsby was a big part of it.
Bob Ormsby. I was Georgia Power at the time. I was involved in the whole idea of doing it, and starting the discussion was Bob Ormsby.
And Joe Daniel was the one, as he's done so often, is the facilitator for getting everybody together.
That's right. Very good at it. Still does it.
He still does it, and he's very good at it.
Yeah. We interviewed Joe Daniel with Bill Shipp.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you remember Bill Shipp
I
in those
do.
days. We'll probably go back to him because Bill Shipp was by virtue of telephone, and Joe was the facilitator of the discussion. But to have Joe sit down like you are right now, we haven't done yet. Those are some of the people that have stood out. Bob Trillerman? No.
No, I go to church with him, but I don't know him. Now, Bernie Brown I know, but I didn't know him well. I didn't know Bernie Brown well until after he retired, and because Bernie and I go to church together. Bernie is a student of leadership, and I love to talk and read on leadership, and so we've had sort of common ground to learn together and to share together. He's an author. I'm an author. I've written. I'm on my second book, and so we exchange a lot of information about books.
I actually have a copy of his book. It's Stairway Down or The Ladder Down or something like that. He gave me a copy of it. I've read it. It's been a long time ago.
But he's written about 4.
Has he? Okay. But he came into our interview. We did it over at Wellstar, and he brought his resume. He was so well organized. He brought his resume, and we started down the discussion. Everything he talked about was in his resume. Of course, he went into it a little deeper, but what a fascinating guy he was. That was a wonderful interview. Never had anybody do that. Who else do you think we need to talk to that I haven't mentioned?
Well, I mentioned the pastor, Reverend Price, but the other one that I think you should talk to is Kermit Keenan.
Yeah.
Kermit is probably the most successful school superintendent of the modern era in Cobb County. So many of the school superintendents, courtesy of Otis Brumby, went into the oblivion. But Kermit was here twice. I find him to be a giant of a man, and he also is I think an incredibly good guy. He's in my Sunday school class. But I was looking at him the other day, and I said, Kermit was a guy that really represents the Cobb County school system.
You'll be intrigued to know that he's on my list.
How about that?
Yeah. We met with James Wilson. I don't know if you remember.
I don't know him.
He was a deputy superintendent for 4 superintendents, and went into consulting after that. Was a superintendent at Fulton County Schools for a while. He knows the whole history. Kerman was high on his list too. But Nelson Price has come up several times. He knows the stuff.
Yeah, and Baptists are usually here longer than Methodists, so they move them around. So,
anything else that you think for history's sake when we make this documentary? It's probably going to be about 90 minutes. We're planning to do the premiere of it at Strand Theater because it's all about history and how we got to where we are.
No, I think you've covered the most important parts. I mean, there's a lot of parts, that you'll read in the book that I did after I retired. I became chairman of Scantech Sciences. I've done tons of charity work, all the strategic plans that I mentioned, and but most of those are small potatoes compared to the things of most of interest.
Johnny Isaacson, I didn't ask you about him. It was a fabulous interview we did in his office, a great interview. You had to have interfaced with him in your Lockheed world at a minimum. Yeah.
Not a lot. I can't remember now why. Johnny was never on a defense committee. It was the real problem, and we tended to migrate to only those that could cast a vote. Yeah. And I mean, if we needed something that had to do with a facility or something, Johnny would have been a good one. But I didn't have a lot to do, a lot of interaction with Johnny.
When
Buddy took care of us.
Yeah. Well, I was about to tell you a Buddy story. When we started our work to get a joint use runway as an option, and myself and the chief of staff for Congressman Buddy Dart, oh gosh, I can't believe it, don't blank on his name, Loudermilk. And I sat down and started talking about that, and we came up with a way to do it, and a lawyer at Lockheed said he found the legislation that set up a restricted use runway. And he remembered working on it, so he sent me a copy of the legislation. And it was a piece of federal legislation came out of Congress. You know who the author of it was? Buddy Darden. And why it restricted the runway to just DOD and Lockheed, I don't know. But I could send you a copy if you're interested in seeing it. You were probably somewhere back there involved in that because that was during Buddy's era.
Yeah, a little bit. I suspect, I don't know, you'll have to ask Buddy, but there was a major noise problem.
Mm-hmm.
And we had people that lived on the Fair Oaks side that would just go bananas when the F-18s would come in late, or a C-130 would come in late. Not so much, I don't think the F-22 ever caused many problems, but the guard stuff did, and particularly the C-130s coming in like at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. They come right over here. And so they were very active. And there were a lot of people that wanted to make that a commercial runway.
Right.
I mean, some very prominent businessmen wanted to take over a facility that was on 41, right next to the 41 in Dobbins. Put the hangar there, and let the commercial go out and use the runway. And they got pretty far down the pike, and it was written up in several magazines. But because of the limited use, they couldn't overcome that.
Yeah.
And nobody really wanted them. They had to build another runway if they did. And,
well, we're fortunate now that we have our own runway now up in the northern part of Cobb. That pretty much is a commercial airport, so it took care of that.
And Lockheed really didn't want the commercial people
Right.
on there.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the Dobbins commander doesn't much want anybody else in the base either.
That's
So
right. That's exactly right.
it's just a safety and security issue.
But this has been a wonderful interview. A lot of pieces of what you taught fit into this puzzle.
Well, I probably talk way more than you wanted me to
No,
talk.
no,
so.
no, 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 no.
Good
You'd be
stories.
surprised. There's going to be a section in there about spouses because they're sort of the hidden person behind the face that people see in the world. And you did a good job of describing Billy. We just think that's an important part of the story because you get press, I got press, Buddy Darden got press. People were always in the newspaper, but somebody was taking care of the family. When you were flying to Washington, D.C. or going to New York or flying out by yourself to California or Fort Worth, there was somebody keeping the home fires going.
Right.
And we hear everybody talk about that. Funny story, Bob Prilliman, who was president of CareStar Industries, and he became the chairman of the board of the Cobb Chamber. He was one of the significant funders of Wellstar and got it off the ground. Anyway, he talked about half of the interview about his wife, Lil. And so one day he called me and I called Ty. He wanted the part of the video where he talked about his wife. I don't know why. I'm assuming he got in the doghouse or
Probably.
something. Probably. Because she's a feisty person. Bob's 82, she's probably 81, but you wouldn't know either one of them without old. So Ty cut that piece and sent it to him. And he was a happy camper. Thank you for the time. I know
Well, you're
it's
welcome.
A lot of time. So.
You're welcome.
And we'll keep you updated. Our plans are when we get this put together, and you're going to be seen over and over again. We'll be sure you see your part ahead of time, so you won't be surprised.
We're going to get everything cleared
before we
publish anything.
Now, if you'll cut that off, I'll tell you one last story. This one
Okay,
doesn't.
turn it off.
This one doesn't go.